Schwartz, founder of LSAT Blog, is a professional LSAT coach who has helped many pre-law students obtain a desirable LSAT score. Steve has many free resources available online through his website and YouTube page. He continuously partners with various leaders across the pre-law and law community, by which his passion and dedication have allowed law students easy access to invaluable information. You can reach Steve through his website, which will be provided in the link on the description box. So, Steve, what exactly is the LSAT test?
Yeah, sure. So the LSAT is the law school admission test, and it's what you need, to, of course, to apply to law school. The LSAT is unlike most other exams, though, because it's not testing content, it's not testing memorization, and it doesn't relate to anything like what most people have done in undergrad or high school or prior. The LSAT's a test of critical reasoning ability. And so your job there is to evaluate arguments and derive conclusions and see what sorts of inferences one could make validly and which inferences would not be valid. And so it's testing your ability to parse through difficult text and complex arguments.
What kind of mindset does the LSAT require?
The LSAT requires a kind of critical and skeptical mindset where you have to, again, like I said, you have to tell when they're making a reasonable argument and when they're making an unreasonable argument. And if it is unreasonable, why is it unreasonable? And if there's any gap at all between the evidence and conclusion, which there typically is, your job is often to at least know what that gap looks like, how you might expose it larger, or how you might close that gap. Now, I could speak a little bit about the format of the LSAT. It has 3 different types of sections. It has logic games, which are mathematical style puzzles that require symbolic logic and making more mathematical styles of deduction. Then there's logical reasoning, which are the short arguments I was referring to. And then there's reading comprehension, which at first glance might look similar to SAT or ACT reading comprehension. But the difference on the LSAT is that they're looking for you to analyze the structure of the argument, not necessarily the content of what they're talking about.
The LSAT is an exam that has been unchanged for many years. Why do you believe that students should understand that test's background in order to achieve a high score? Why is it important for students to not only understand how to solve the problems, but understand why the problem is solved the way that it is?
That's a great question. I think that it's important to understand the format and to understand why the LSAT is structured the way that it is, because you need to better understand the exam in order to conquer it. So the LSAT, one of the nice things about it is that they've released nearly 100 old LSAT test forms, previously administered exams. And so if you are proficient in the old exam format and the old questions, then there's pretty much nothing new that you're going to see on test day. They just kind of keep reusing the same types of questions again and again in slightly different guises. Now, to understand the techniques is extremely important and understand why they work. Because if you only understand how to blindly follow some technique that someone else gives you, you might get the easier questions right. But then on the tougher questions that require a more flexible and adaptive approach, you'll fall apart. A lot of times on the tougher questions, they'll frame something in an unfamiliar way to prevent you from spotting what's really going on underneath the surface. And so what separates, I think, the 165 plus scorers from those who score below 165 is that the top scorers understand why the strategies work and they understand why the formulas are derived the way they are.
Thank you. For my next question, would you recommend studying in a group setting?
I think a group setting has a lot to offer. I think that a lot of times people have different areas of strength and weakness, and so they can help each other out. Let's say one person's good at logic games, one person's good at logical reasoning. They can kind of teach each other. And same goes if one person's in the 140s, another person's in the 160s. The person in the 160s is not scoring perfectly, of course, but they still know enough that they could teach the person in the 140s quite a bit. And you also learn a lot by teaching. So I think that both parties would benefit from that.
Thank you. Many students are also are on strict budgets. What is your opinion about youth study books?
I think youth study books can be good if they have minimal or no writing in them at all. The problem is if there's tons of markings in pencil or pen or highlighting, it could take a lot of time to erase all the pencil markings, for example. Then, of course, pens and highlighters, there's not much you can do about them. And so I'd say it's not really worth your time to spend hours and hours just erasing stuff. You're better off just getting fresh copies of the exams. Most of the old exams are published in books of 10 for about $20 each. And so it's really a worthwhile investment. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the cost of law school. So I'd say it's well worth getting new books if you need to.
Thank you.
Hi, Steve. So my questions are, can the LSAT be learned?
The LSAT can 100% be learned. And I'm not saying that everybody is naturally going to get a 180 after 2 to 3 months of studying. Most people, I think, need 5 to 6 months in order to reach their fullest potential. And so it can be discouraging if after a month or two, you're not seeing the results that you want. And so I would encourage students, give it more time. It's worth it. The LSAT score is worth much more than your undergraduate GPA, yet your undergraduate GPA takes 4 years. And so to invest 5 to 6 months in your LSAT studying is totally reasonable, in my opinion. And I've seen the success stories. I experienced it myself as well. I went from the low 150s to a 175, and it took me a year to get there. And so I'm not saying I want it to take you nearly that long. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to get a 175, but everybody has the potential to improve at least somewhat. And I've taken hundreds, if not thousands of students through the process. And I have many of their stories cataloged in what I call LSAT diaries on my website, where students actually wrote in their own study journeys. So you can see someone who went from the 140s to the 150s or 160s, someone who went from the 150s to the 160s or 170s, and everything in between. It definitely happens. It just takes a lot of work.
My next question is, there is an LSAT schedule at the end of this month. What would you say is the most important up to these test takers should know?
So in the final month before taking the LSAT, the biggest thing, of course, is pacing and endurance. At this point, you already want to have your foundation down. You already want to have some basic proficiency in each of the LSAT question types. But there's a lot more to the LSAT than just getting the content right. You have to, of course, solve the questions efficiently as well. And so I'd be wanting students to work on individual timed sections and ideally full-length 5-section timed exams, taking an experimental section from a different exam and splicing it into the 4 of your released LSAT form. And so one timed exam per week, along with detailed review, is an absolute must, I think, in the final month.
What would you recommend for them if they didn't receive the score they were hoping for?
Retake. Honestly, the biggest thing is to simply retake. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, so there's never really a downside to retaking the LSAT. You just want to think about what can you do differently next time around in order to get the score increase that you're looking for. So maybe it's getting better books, getting more exams if you need them, carving out more time in your LSAT study schedule, in your day, in your week, in your month, and taking the LSAT when you feel ready. So if you need to postpone or withdraw and go for a later test date, so be it. But the LSAT is worth it. And of course, if you're putting in 5 to 6 months or a year and you're just not making any headway, that's okay. It's okay to decide to focus on other components of your application and make the best of it when you apply. But ultimately, the LSAT score is the biggest factor. And so I'd encourage students to give it another shot. It's okay to take the LSAT 3, 4, 5, or even 6 times. I know it sounds crazy, but people do. And it's okay because law schools don't average multiple scores. Like I said, there's not really a downside to retaking if you think you can do better.
Last question is, you worked really hard to build a 99th percentile score, and you also provide a wealth of information through your YouTube channel. Why share these free resources for other students?
Well, first off, I think I just don't want other people to have to go through the same experience that I did, because it was really discouraging and demoralizing, and I felt like an idiot for a lot of it. And this was back in the 2005, 2006. There was very little in the way of free LSAT information online back then. And so I thought, well, I could put things out there and I had nothing to lose because I wasn't really selling anything at the time. And so I figured, let me just put out the information and help folks. And then I started teaching the LSAT. And so it attracted some students, sure. But I think overall, the internet just brings distribution costs down to virtually zero. It only takes my time to record the material or to write it down. And so I figured, let me just put out as much as I can and kind of spread the knowledge,
Thank you so much for that. And Steve, I know I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much for all the effort and the passion and the drive that you have to helping other students succeed in the LSAT. So we want to thank you so much for that. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.